All right, everybody. Welcome to Fundraising Friday, second edition here in March. Today, we're doing, as we have been for the last few months, our first session, or I guess we're in February. Sorry. The first session of the month, we did a deep dive on how to recruit and onboard and steward your board members so that they can become a really valuable part of your fundraising team. And this latter half of the month that we've been doing things like case studies or showing sort of the content in action. And we are incredibly lucky today to actually have a panel discussion with Green Faith, their executive director, chair of the board, and fundraising advisor. So we will be introducing that crew in a minute. As per usual, we'll go through the progressive multiplier information because I think we have a few new people on the phone. I want to make sure you guys know how to hook into free resources around revenue generation, and then we will hand it over to the panelists. So the folks you have on the phone today from Progressive Multiplier, myself, I'm Bethany Mackey, the managing director over here, and my partner in crime, Jasmine Kearse, who is our Associate Director of Marketing and Constituent Engagement. Say hi, Jazz.
Hey, everybody.
Awesome. All right. On the phone, from the attendee side, we have grantees from Packard through the Resilience Initiative, as well as from the Flexible Leadership Awards at the Evelyn and Walter Haas Jr. Fund. The folks from Haas Jr. are newer to our Fundraising Fridays, so really appreciate everybody making time here. We do ask if you would please introduce yourself in the chat with your name and organization and what role you have. We have folks who are hands-on keys, fundraising managers, we've got executive directors, and we've got some volunteers. So please let us know what your role is. And just wanted to let everyone know we are recording these sessions and they are in password protected portals for both groups of grantees. So just wanted to make everyone aware of that. So really quick introduction to Progressive Multiplier before we get to the really good stuff. We are existing basically to be the R&D arm of progressive fundraising because we know that if the money that philanthropy gives alone were enough, that the progressive movement would already be much further down the road than it is. So what we try to do is find scalable, repeatable fundraising experiments, put some grant money or financing behind them, help our grantees come up with great tactics and then publish them and give them low risk financing to scale them. So that's what we are all about. We have 3 portfolios of grantees, Achieving Justice, Realizing Democracy, and Restoring Environment. Our grantees are primarily civic engagement nonprofits, so folks that are doing organizing, campaigning, litigating, civic engagement kind of work, educating policymakers. So if you think you fit into any of our portfolios, please let us know. We are always interested in bringing in new applications for grants. At this time, we do not fund direct service organizations if direct service is all you do. We're hoping to grow to the point where we can, but we are not quite there yet as a 2-year-old funding intermediary. So if you have any questions of, are you too direct service for us, give me a call or shoot me an email and we can talk about your use case. Regardless of whether or not you are grant eligible with Progressive Multiplier, we offer a free online community with all kinds of revenue generation resources and discussion boards. We also publish all of the results of our grantees' projects and experiments, both the ones that went really well and the ones that were totally fail forwards. So check that out. You can sign up at progressivemultiplier.fund. We do have 2 rounds of funding coming up later in the spring, early summer. We will have a second call for our environmental justice cohort. So if you are doing environmental justice work and interested in revenue generation, please contact me. That'll be an invite-only call. And then we'll be doing an open call for a second round of progressive stimulus project funding. So let us know if you are interested in that. Any questions on all things Progressive Multiplier? All right, guys. Last plug for Fundraising Fridays. A lot of you had asked for the dates so that you could get them on your calendars. We've got our March through June dates set, as well as our tentative topics. We know we're gonna thank you guys all for answering the survey about what you wanted to learn about. Donor stewardship, especially during this time where it's likely not gonna be until fall where we're back to kind of normal operating with face-to-face events. So donor stewardship is going to be our March focus. There were also a lot of requests for mid-major and planned or legacy giving advice, what technology to get to support fundraising and how you possibly begin starting to investigate that. And then in June, we'll be doing a special series that is actually going to be a follow-up to a lecture about lightning in a bottle moments when you have those big news-driven fundraising moments, and how you can be ready to capture the donors that become aware of you because of those spotlights. And we'll be doing sort of the what happens after, how do you retain them? How do you decide if you want to retain them? Those kinds of things. We're also going to be offering a new thing in April and May. Before we combined both the Resilience Initiative and the Haas grantees, our sessions were a little bit smaller and we did more individual deep dives. So I would do the research based on who signed up and pull up your own use cases around your fundraising programs that I could see from your website and social media and things like that, and actually did almost like mini one-on-one jam sessions about your stuff in our sessions. And we haven't been able to do that since our sessions have grown so much. So we're going to reintroduce some extra sessions in April and May that will be limited signups. I haven't decided on the topics yet, so if there's anything you want to do deep dives on, please shoot me an email. But stay tuned with your granting institutions for info on how to sign up for those. All right, let's get to the good stuff. To have a very healthy culture around fundraising, it really does take all three legs to a stool. And this was a concept that Deborah had brought up on when we were preparing for this panel, that the board and the executive director and the staff really do make up the three legs, and everybody has really distinct responsibilities when it comes to building and maintaining the fundraising culture. So really what we want to do today is utilize the time and talents of our three amazing panelists to talk about the roles that each of them play within Green Faith, and where they have had great successes and not so great moments as staff and board when it comes to supporting fundraising. So I would love for our panelists to introduce themselves. Fletcher, could you kick us off?
Sure. I'm Fletcher Harper. I'm Green Faith's executive director based in northern New Jersey. Really nice to be with you all.
Thanks, Fletcher. And Deborah? I think you're on mute.
Come on. I'm the chair of the Green Faith Board, and I live in New Jersey. I don't know if you want to know anything.
Thank you. I'll come back to you because I want to talk a little bit about Green Faith before we dive in. And Bud, could you introduce yourself in your role?
Yes, I serve as an independent consultant. I've worked for 6 different foundations. I've worked for multiple national and international nonprofits, and I do consulting around communications, fundraising, and strategy for them. And I'm pleased to work with a small family foundation right now, Green Faith, and a couple of other smaller nonprofits.
Wonderful. So I got introduced to Green Faith actually through the Resilience Initiative project, and had the honor of working with Fletcher through all things end of year fundraising a couple of months ago. I think we've survived as fellow fundraisers on the call. So Fletcher, could you take a minute and just talk about what Green Faith does and sort of where you guys are in your evolution as an organization to give context for the discussion?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I seeing all the names of the different partners and groups on the call, I wish we had time to hear about all of you, because it's really, really cool work that you all are doing. And a friendly shout out to Amanda at Creation Justice Ministries, who we've known for many years and who do great work. So Green Faith is a international multi-faith climate and environmental justice organization, and we've evolved over the years. When we were first legally incorporated in New Jersey in 1992. We were an all volunteer group, and there was really very little faith-based work on climate and environmental issues going on then. And after some initial staffing, I came on board in 2002. And over the years, we've developed from working in New Jersey to working nationally across the US. And now we work internationally, and we have staff in Europe and Africa, as well as in North America. Our mission, we see the earth and all people as sacred gifts who are at risk because of climate change. And we work to organize and support grassroots faith-based leadership on climate change. And I want to emphasize the grassroots piece because we see it as our role. We are absolutely faith-based, but we're also independent of any particular religious organization or denomination, which gives us the freedom to be really bold and more out there on issues than many individual denominations are able to be because of the understandable constraints that they face. And so, for example, we were among the first faith-based supporters for the fossil fuel divestment movement and have played a very active role in that. We do a lot of education and training work. We do campaigning, we campaign on divestment. We have work going on now in 5 countries on educating and training religious leaders to protect tropical forests and the rights of their indigenous guardians. In the US, we're doing work to support a Green New Deal or whatever it eventually gets called, and to press for very strong climate, jobs, and justice policies. We're active in campaigns to try to end bank financing for fossil fuel infrastructure and industrial agriculture. So a lot of combination of leadership training and campaigning work. And we try to, and why did I stop there, Bethany?
Sure. So Fletcher, thank you so much. I was fascinated by Greenfaith's model and just the sort of the breadth and depth of the work that you guys do. Wanted to throw out just some rules of the road for our panel discussion to our attendees here. So I've got a couple of tee-up questions for the panel, really looking at the executive director, the board, and staff roles. And then you guys have submitted a few questions that we're gonna have all 3 of our panelists field. But feel free in the chat to throw in additional questions that come up, and we will be very sort of loose and organic in our conversation here, as we always are. So any questions from the audience before we get started? Things are looking quiet on chat. I finally figured out how to actually take the chat window out so I can see it. So I'm not constantly going to have to ask Jasmine what's going on. All right. So Fletcher, we'll put you in the hot seat first. What role does the executive director really need to play in the board recruitment and onboarding and ongoing stewardship to make it a fundraising powerhouse board?
So I think that, what I've found experience-wise is it's just really important for the executive director to build good one-on-one relationships with board members, because board members become willing to do strong fundraising work because they believe in the mission and because they have a good relationship with the executive director or the head of the staff. And I think that I used to assume when I got started that the first piece, just sort of being committed to the mission, was enough. And that's totally important. But I've found that the more time I invest in building good relationships with as many board members as possible, the more they become committed to helping support the organization. And I think also, as we've grown over time, what I've seen is that it's good for me to as the executive director to facilitate relationships between board members and the rest of the staff, because that broadens the exposure and experience of the board members to the organization and makes them feel even more part of the team and part of the community. So I think there's a relationship building piece. Then there's just a piece of like consistently putting fundraising on the agenda of the board, and working with the board's leadership, the board chair, the board executive committee to do that. And Deborah's, probably like thinking inside of her head, he needs to continue to practice what he's preaching, because I don't want to make it out like I'm, so awesome at this. I think that, but it's putting it out and getting the basic training as an ED to understand how fundraising works, what the best practices are, so that when you go to the board with a request, you can make good use of their time and set them up to be successful and have them feel that they're part of a well-run operation, as opposed to having something that's more haphazard and a little bit flimsy in terms of its planning. And that's where being able to work with, Bethany, with you and with other, strong people who know what they're doing fundraising wise is super helpful. And then I think the third thing is just, and Deborah and Bud are both gonna sort of gag when they hear me say this, because again, it's something I need to work on, but it's, just really investing time in it. We've been very fortunate over the years in that we've had a certain number of donors come to us and say, we really like what you're doing, we want to support you, but that's not enough to keep the doors open. And really being willing to spend the time, really being willing to get rejected a bunch, is a key piece of the picture. So I mean, to me, those are none of those are rocket science, but it's like so much of stuff in life, it's actually doing that consistently and repeatedly that I think is the secret.
Deborah, what do you look to Fletcher for as the executive director when it comes to your role as board chair?
Well, it's where should I start? While Fletcher was talking, I was thinking that one of the other things that is, I think, very important in his role is how well he knows how to relate to people in general. So, you were talking about relating to board members, and I now realize how you've really kind of got me all figured out over all these years. But his approach to this work, whether he's talking to a board member, potential funder, or an audience, or whoever it is so enthusiastic, and appropriately so. And I think that speaks volumes about the organization when approaching potential, well, anyone, but we're talking about potential donors. His sort of genuine passion for the organization, for the mission. And I think that for the executive director, that is really key. Fletcher really has the ability to relate to people on that very kind of strong interpersonal level, and I think that helps a lot. But just repeat your question, because I got onto what he was doing. You were saying about?
Yeah, just if there's anything specific as board chair that you look to the executive director
yeah.
for. So for the executive directors we've got in the audience, what do they need to be ready to give their
right. Well, I mean, I look to to our executive director for a lot, because I can't keep up with all the work of the organization, or, you know, how science is changing, all the things that are related to how we function. So, and going back to your three-legged stool graphic, it's very important for me to look to him for leadership in terms of steps going forward. So I would almost never do anything, I don't think, on behalf of the organization without checking in with Fletcher. I mean, you know, on anything that is a major issue, or it has an impact on a lot of people, or, you know, I always check in. So I guess I look to him for leadership and also for guidance in terms of how to approach whatever it is we're doing.
Great. Throwing it out there to our audience, are there any specific questions in terms of executive director role when it comes to the life cycle of the board, recruitment through stewardship, and really getting them the support they need to become fundraisers, or any questions you want to raise specific to that, given your own experiences with your executive director or your board? And same rules always apply on Fundraising Friday. You are allowed to be candid. This is a really safe space. Feel free to come off mute and speak up, or can put it in the chat. Give folks a second. Anybody?
Hi,
All
this
right.
is Megan Hudgens. I have a question.
Go ahead, Megan.
Can you hear me? Hi, guys.
Yes.
Thanks for all of your thoughts. We are just about to recruit about half of a new board, and I was just wondering how you've seen an executive director do a really good job setting the expectation for fundraising at the onset during orientation and onboarding of new board members. Did an as an executive director or an executive director you've worked with done a really good job setting expectations right at the forefront during the early time of joining the board? We just don't want to miss that opportunity.
That's a great
Bethany,
question, Megan.
I could share a thought if
for it,
that would
Fletcher.
be helpful. I mean,
Let's
one
do it.
I'll say about Deborah, because she won't brag on herself, but I mean, when I'm and I really like what you're saying, Megan, because I agree with you. I think it's especially when you've got a group of people coming in, it's a great opportunity to do a cultural reset or advancement or whatever. I find that for me, again, having a combination of a group conversation with the new board members, but also one-on-one conversations. In my experience, and I mean, I'm a Christian minister, so I have the danger of like over psychologizing things sometimes, but I think that I think an awful lot of fundraising, like in the best sense of this term, is a confidence game. You know, people need to believe that the director is really committed to the mission and has the commitment to go out and lead, including asking people for money, and project that confidence. And one of the ways that I've found that I can show that confidence is by showing the board that I'm not afraid to talk about fundraising and money with them, both in a group and individually. So I think, but then, and this is where like Deborah has been really good as a board chair about also talking about that consistently in board meetings and in committee meetings and repeating it. And I just think that sort of that repetition, and then she's, you know, then when it comes to year end time, she's been like reminding the board members, this is our time, we need to step up. But, and then saying, you know, and letting everybody see, you know, hey, I'm reaching out to these colleagues and friends, and hey, Fletcher, can the staff send us an update and a report on what's coming in? So that it, you know, it's not just the staff doing it. So I think it's a combination of the executive director needs to talk about it, but also if you've got a board chair that's willing to talk about it, that's really, really important.
Yeah, I'd just like to add that I think being very clear about expectations of board members when they first come onto the board, expectations in terms of fundraising, I mean all the expectations, but in terms of fundraising especially, and depending on what kind of work you do, it's possible that you bring board members on for a variety of reasons, for their expertise, for their connections to other people, you know, for their willingness to work for the organization, to put time in. And sometimes there can be candidates who are really, you know, just seem like a great fit for your board, but you're really not sure how they're going to feel about having to be involved with raising funds, and you don't want to alienate them, but you really do yourself a disservice if you don't spell it out right at the start. And Fletcher would have the answer to this. I don't know how many people have actually declined coming on the board because of the fundraising responsibility. But my sense is that people really appreciate hearing about it up front.
And, you know, building on that even further, we definitely have had some people we've had some people who've decided when they hear that we take the fundraising piece of the picture really seriously, take a step back. And we've also had a couple of people who've come onto the board for a short period of time and then realized that we mean it seriously. and it's, I just think it's, you know, that it's better to do it that way, and to be clear about it than to have people sort of, and I think what's, yeah, so, but the repetition I think is key.
Yeah. But I know you've had a lot of exposure to boards, especially in that onboarding phase and setting up that structure of expectation. What advice would you have for Megan?
I think one of the things I try to tell people is they put a heavy amount of expectation on a board to be the fundraising entity. And for a lot of nonprofits, it's difficult because they start as a small organization and grow. Green Faith has grown significantly from being an organization that was working largely in New Jersey to being national to now being international in multiple countries. With that expansion, you often have a board that was localized that's then, you know, growing. So I think one of the things that is perhaps most helpful in reframing is to think that you don't have to put all the pressure for the fundraising to be on the existing board you have or the one that you want to develop. You can actually create more than one board. So in our case, we're looking at, you know, a body of people that can be advisors that have intellectual capacity and so forth for Green Faith. People who are money and resource connectors that might be a different kind of board than what we have or be a supplement to the existing board. And then the traditional board that's worker bees and the people that handle the fiduciary responsibility and the governance of the organization. They get stuff done. They may not be the people that can draw in 5,000 or 20,000 or whatever your level of organization needs. So that's an important thing, I think, in terms of thinking about the development of the board.
Really appreciate that.
The other thing that I just add to that is that I always think in terms of when I talk to the board about our fundraising goals, I like to talk about it both in, we have a minimum amount that people are supposed to either give or get annually. But I also like to talk about it in terms of our board's goal. So if you take that number and multiply it by the number of board members and then jack it up a little bit with, you know, positive thinking, say, well, this year, you know, our goal as a group, as a board, is to raise X amount of money. And I think that takes the pressure off of people who feel they might not necessarily get to their own personal goal. And I hope it also encourages other people to be as generous as they possibly can. But I think looking at it that way sort of takes the heat off of the individual person, and it suggests that you're going to work as a team to raise the money.
That's a really great point.
I think I want to add to that is that one of the things that Green Faith is really working on is that most organizations actually describe outward, here's what we do, why don't you join us? And actually, you want to invite the reverse of that. You want to frame things around you, the person, the constituent that you're interacting with that has a relationship, and think in their mindset about what they want to better themselves, how they envision themselves as being a part of it. And you describe them as being the activist that you're helping to support jointly to, cooperatively do something together. So it's a reframing, and it's part of the coaching of culture that everybody in the staff, everyone that's involved with the organization is part of the fundraising, not just the board, that it's, everyone's part of the process of selling who we are and how we have an impact in such a way that it's you-centered around the person that helps them imagine how they can participate in the process of doing it. And Green Faith's expansion right now is based on relational organizing. So it's one person telling another person about how we can affect climate change together. And they're actually being equipped not just to do the programmatic piece, to do the thought pieces around, how can we affect change around climate change. They're selling, in effect, the idea of the organization, but in such a way that it's actually you-centered. I want to be a part of helping to end climate change. And I can see myself doing that if I participate in with these other people in this relational process towards this common mission and goal.
That's great. So fantastic questions, guys. I'm really appreciating the discussion. We've talked a lot about sort of that upfront expectation and different structures that you can use to more elegantly sort of meet the need. Deborah, would love to hear from a board perspective, once you have the board assembled and everyone is serving, how do you keep that fundraising commitment upfront in a way that is authentic and hits the mark for your board members? You had mentioned that everybody makes a give-get commitment, but how does that become part of the regular operating cadence of the board?
Well, I just want to mention that Janelle, I think, had a question there. I saw your hand raised before, so I just want to register her question.
Oh, sure. I cannot see anybody except for our panelists. So if you have a question, Jasmine, if you can flag that, if you can see the full slate of folks.
Oh, thank you, Deborah. I'd love to hear the answer that Bethany asked, to the answer to the question that Bethany asked, but then I can share my question after that.
Okay. So I think to me, and I have to say that before, well, my career was my second career was as an executive director of a nonprofit organization. So I had the advantage of seeing things from both sides, which is really helpful. But so I think because of that, I function I am really conscious of our fiscal year, when it begins and when it ends, because, and, we want to raise a certain amount of money by the end of the fiscal year. So I think by using the calendar as a sort of a reminder, once the end of the year fundraising is over, then I think you want to sort of back off and let your board rest on their laurels, I hope, from all the great fundraising they did. But then, we're going to be having our March meeting next month, and we have a meeting in January too. And I really always am staying conscious of the point in the calendar year, so that we have some other times of the year when we raise money, like on Earth Day, for example, which makes a lot of sense for our organization. So I think focusing around those moments over the course of the year is very helpful, because it generates enthusiasm, so similar to what Bud was saying about the general public. I think the board can get more excited about raising money if it's kind of connected to something you know, like a date on the calendar, or we're having a big launch of our international, you know, something like that. If it's connected to something, people want to see how their money is going to get used. And so the more that you can connect your fundraising request to how it's actually going to be used, the more closely you can do that, the better.
Absolutely. Janelle, did you want to weigh in on your question?
Sure, thank you. I think I shared a little bit that we have a new CEO of our organization. Advancing Justice LA has been around for 38 years. We had a founding CEO for 37 years. And so with a new executive in place, we recognize that it's important for her to establish a relationship with the board. And we've been very fortunate. She's keen to, you know, fundraise and is very good at that. But, you know, our previous CEO was a very prolific fundraiser, and the board really didn't have to lean in as much as we're asking them to kind of rise up to now. And it's been exciting times. I think what I'm trying to figure out is the dynamic between when I'm asking the CEO to lean in more with the board, when I'm supposed to lean in more with the board. I work with our major donors, and the board is part of that. So I'd love to get, you know, even Fletcher's and Bud and, you know, your different perspectives on how you would recommend, you know, this new CEO establishing herself with the board, and when it's best to help her, like, kind of rise up to not just talk about fundraising. For example, she really wanted to prioritize Planned Giving initiative this year, and we had challenged our board to join us in signing up. I signed up to be and to commit to Planned Giving for our organization. So, you know, one of the things I was trying to figure out is how important is it for her to ask, or our board chair to ask our different board members, or when I ask, you know. So I'm just trying to figure out the, you know, the softer side of the dynamics of who interacts with whom when.
That is an awesome question. I will throw that out to the panel. Fletcher, as an executive director, what's your thoughts on that transition from founder to new and reestablishing with the board, and where you're looking for your development director to step up?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And, you know, I was, Janelle, as you were describing your question, I was putting myself in the position of the new director and thinking that, okay, if that new director is, I don't know how much experience she or he or they have in fundraising, but if it's not something where there's a lot of past experience, I think one thing that I would really encourage would be to get some training, so that they start to feel really comfortable about how fundraising works, because I think that helps a lot. I'm a big fan of thinking that it's most powerful when the director, and even more than that, board members make the ask, just because I think that that's I think that that's important. But what we try to do every time we're making an ask is just to look really honestly at who is the person who's best positioned to make the ask in any given situation. Because there may be some audiences where you're the right person. There may be other audiences where it's the director. There may be other audiences where it's the board chair, or a certain board member, or a certain board member plus you, or a certain board member plus. So I think that especially with, you know, with larger asks, just to do that analysis like each time about who's best positioned. I mean, the goal is to secure the resources and to build a good ongoing relationship. And so what we try to do is just say, okay, in this case, who's, you know, and the default, I think, is that if it's not clear, I think it's smart to have the director do it. You know, some donors, if you have two people come to them, they may feel ganged up on. Another donor may feel if you have 3 people come, they're like, super, this means I'm really important. So it's just, you know, so much of it is case by case thing. I don't know if that helps or not, but that was what came to mind for me.
Thank you.
One thing that I learned many, many years ago about fundraising is that people give to people. And as much as they may be inspired by your organization's mission, in the end, they're giving the money because of the relationship that they have with the person who's asking for the money. And so, for example, there's a big difference between going to approaching people who are friends and relatives, you know, people in one's own sphere. They're very likely to give money just because of who's asking, because it's someone they know, and you know, there's a certain amount of kind of implied, I don't want to say pressure, but incentive, let's say, to respond to that request. So in the absence of having already established a relationship with someone that you're approaching, then I think, to Fletcher's point, it should be the person who has the best potential to establish a rapport with the person who's being approached.
Yeah, as a development director, I try to disappear. I want the executive director, the chair of the board, to be the person that interacts with the parties that you're trying to raise funds from. And I want to position as many things as I can behind the scenes so that those people are empowered to have the direct relationship. There's a couple of statistical facts behind that. One is that unfortunately, just in nonprofits in general, development directors have a high turnover rate, less than 2 years. Executive directors tend to be more stable and be in place for several years and develop longer relationships. And they're the seen party. They're when you do a survey of people that know anything about Green Faith, everyone, what's the name? It's Fletcher Harver. Or they know certain people that they have that connection with. The other is the sort of 80-20 or 90-10 rule, which is 10% of the people are going to give you 90% of your funds, and you want to position the people that are at the highest level in charge to interact with and spend their time with those people. The hardest job that I think Fletcher has as head of Green Faith is making decisions about how to spend his time and where to put it. And unfortunately, an executive director has to spend 50% of their time doing fundraising. And the only way that they can really meaningfully do that is if a lot of people are basically helping to make part of that happen. And a lot of that 50% is actually just the relationship building and so forth that goes around the very, very small amount of time that you actually are ever making a direct ask.
Thank you. All of the bits of wisdom will be heeded, and it really sheds light on, I think, the dynamics that I'm looking at.
What's it like, Janelle, in your position to be going from a situation where you have, I mean, it sounds like a really big transition, and I'm sure that's a challenging situation to be in.
Yeah, absolutely. Stuart Quo was our ED, founding ED. He's a pretty well-known civil rights leader. And, our new CEO is, 12 years as a CEO of previous more direct services organization. So she comes with considerable fundraising prowess. She was able to grow her organization. But what was very interesting is that when she came into her role, she had said, I don't want to be Stuart Quo. I want to be Connie Chung Jo. I want to be who I am and make a mark for myself. And so myself, I totally believe in Bud's philosophy. I'm behind the curtain, and I've kind of been in that role to really prop up. Stuart kind of takes a lot of the spotlight whenever he walks into a room, which is great. I didn't have to do anything for that, but really it's helping provide Connie with the information, the background, kind of teeing her up to make an informed ask, setting the stage for her. So really, for me, it's been trying to figure out, how do I prop her up and help prepare her well so that she can make asks in impactful ways. And like Deborah said, I think both you and Deborah were saying, it matters who we're talking to. And I think that if I can do my job, and I've been in my organization for almost 7 years, but only 3 years in development, and I guess maybe I've defied those odds, Bud. But what I'm really interested in is just trying to figure out, I'm probably one who thinks about this more, and she's like you, Fletcher, probably, you're in a lot of different directions, but trying to get her to remember, like, I want her and maybe even our board chair to be best positioned to make asks of our own board. And I think the board members respond better to these kind of individuals. And yeah, like, I can't remember who said, but instilling confidence and building a person's rapport is critical. And yeah, I see my role in doing that. So thank you so much.
You made me, I was thinking, Janelle, when you were talking, that I don't know how any of the other directors, executive directors on the call may feel about this, but I feel like I think about fundraising and the fact that I ought to be doing more of it a lot. And it's where all kinds of like avoidance behaviors can come in at times. And I'm, and I think one of the things that I appreciate about the way that Deborah and Bud have both supported me is like to try to make it easier for me just to keep on thinking about that. Like Deborah, and I've been in my role for a long time too. So there's always the danger of getting stale or things getting old and, and getting into habits. So like a couple of months ago, Deborah suggested, let's do a call every 2 weeks with several members of the executive committee to help you stay on track with fundraising. And it was really helpful because it was like, wow, that's cool. It's like, because I oftentimes will get stressed. It's like, I'm not meeting my targets. I'm not where I need to be. Oh my God, this is so anxiety provoking to have to deal with. And it's really, I say it in a kind of a joking tone, but it's not fun. And the fact that the board chair went out of her way to create a way to make it easier for me to pay more attention to it in a friendly, collaborative way really was a huge help. And Bud has done similar things too, like so I think that's the other thing. Again, that I don't think that's just my experience as a director, but I don't want to presume either. So
I want to add to that another perspective, which is that and we have discussions about to what extent we want to ask other staff members to be involved with fundraising. And, there definitely are different points of view on that topic. But I find, and I've suggested, and we've, Fletcher, is well aware of the wonderful talents of some of our staff members. And hearing the board members, for example, hearing from the staff themselves, not just Fletcher, because we know him and we see him all the time, but some of the other staff members that our board really, doesn't have occasion to see, talking about programs and the work that we're doing. Can be very inspirational to board members and to other people too, but in talking about how to create an incentive for board members to give, I think having some direct contact with and experiencing the enthusiasm of some of our staff members, I think can be a real it gives people a real, like I said before, it makes a connection between their donation and how it's going to be used. And I think that's very helpful.
I appreciate that, Deborah. I think you're so right. I know that it amazed me. We have a new board chair, and she actually wanted to riff on all of the fundraising projects that I'm overseeing within our grantee portfolio. And I was like, really? You want to talk spreadsheets and fundraising results? And it was so funny, but it was she seeing the actual work in action gave her a totally different perspective and opened up an interesting conversation about who she thought might make good donors or potential advisory council members or things like that. So totally agree with that, kind of giving folks the broader view. Before we turn over, we sort of organically got to this question in terms of what are the systems, the human systems, the tech systems, the process, the culture that enables this kind of fundraising three-legged stool. We could, do an 8-week course on this alone. But, Fletcher, you had called out the sort of executive committee sessions you're having every couple of weeks. But are there any other ones you want to call out that you have seen be particularly helpful in enabling both executive directors and board members really grow into and take a hold of that fundraising role? But you're on mute.
You mean some of the tech and process stuff to put into place in order to help with the fundraising?
Yeah. Tech,
Yeah.
process, or anything that you have seen really be that good behind the scenes support that a development director can put in place, or that, on the tech side we can put in place that makes the actual job of the ED and the board a little more seamless when it comes to the fundraising piece.
Yeah, I think there's a variety of things that can be put into place. One of the things that I think frustrates people that are in nonprofits is that it's too easy to look to your left and right at other institutions that are bigger than you and say, why we don't have that, so we can't do this. I think for every one of the things you need to put into place, there's scalable ways to get into it, from starting with like interns and volunteers setting up something on an Excel spreadsheet to having a staff member that's dedicated that deals with data and runs Salesforce for you, that sort of thing. Every one of these things, there's a continuum for. So it's a matter of doing a dance to figure out what kind of investments you're putting into which things to get you to the point that you want to be. A big part of it is having a strategic plan in place. I've worked with a number of nonprofits that just simply don't have one. They have, approaches towards one, but there's a robust strategic plan that the boards had buy-in to. That's helpful. That's actually helping to guide Green Faith right now. They did a complete relook at what they were doing and how they like to grow. The reason that they're becoming an international organization and the way that they are and making the investments they are is because they did staff retreats and analysis back in 2019 that's driving a multi-year process. I do think data is like one of the most important things. When we go to like a Target and we have to return something, we don't have a receipt, we can take it to them and they'll be able to figure out that it was us and the purchase it by our credit card number and so forth. Every sort of major company has something like Salesforce or a data system that they can track us. And people want to have a experience of being known by an organization and have a unified sense of that they're engaged with it, regardless of which staff member or how they come to it on Twitter or Facebook or through a newsletter. So getting a unified look and feel and coordinating your systems, I think, is one thing. So that's like doing visual identity development, doing website redevelopment, and engaging in social media in more of a full-on way. Again, there's a scalable way to go into those things. Investing in doing a constituent relationship management system, a CRM like Salesforce. You can do lesser equivalents but for nonprofits, Salesforce is actually free and low cost to sort of like ramp into. I think evolving to a point where you're actually doing prospecting of the data that you have. So say I've got a nonprofit and it has 30,000 contacts. I probably don't know a lot about what those contacts have in terms of their capacity. Howard may have given us a $5,000 gift, but Muhammad over here might actually have the capacity to give us a $25,000 gift every year, and I just don't know it. So screening the data that you have through Wealth Engine or Donor Search or one of these types of tools helps tell you where you want to focus your time and energy about the types of people that are before you, that are part of who you are, to sort of go after to get funding. So a CRM, advanced prospecting tool, the visual identity stuff that gives a coordinated look and feel for people. And then ultimately you have to do a calling process to get towards better storytelling, the impact stories of what the organization is doing. And it can be quite simple. We shared a story on social media for Green Faith of someone on the ground that's doing work in Africa. And if you look on the backside at our social media engagement, it's off the chart in terms of the interaction with that story, because it's a human story. People react to it and interact with it. They share it. They make comments on it and so forth. It's getting at that kind of thing to tell and give an image of who and what the organization is.
No, that's great. But I couldn't agree more. I think, we work with a lot of the grantees through both of these groups, as well as our own portfolio here at Progressive Multiplier. And I would say in at least 80% of the sort of fundraising challenges are rooted in something that has nothing to do with fundraising. It's sort of the precursor. It's that telling the right story, nailing the narrative, the visual identity and consistency. We've done a couple of sessions on that previously. So if anybody wants to revisit those topics with regards to fundraising, feel free to reach out. We had our attendees here throw some questions our way when they registered. And obviously, guys, feel free to put other questions in the chat. These were just the ones that came in with your registration. So wanted to open these up to the panel. So for all three of you, whoever wants to jump in into the hot seat. So the first question that our attendees came up with was, how can staff hold board members accountable for their commitments, especially the non-financial ones?
I think that, you know, I mean, from my perspective, that gets back to accountability comes through relationships. And the more that you've got relationships, but I mean, I see with our board, the more they get to know members of the staff, the more they care about them, the more they feel accountable to their role in the picture as board members. So, I mean, I don't want to sound like a broken record, but I think the combination of, like, you need to do the repetition of here's the responsibility of the board so that that's put out there. But I think that building those relationships is key towards having board members, you know, follow through. And that's not because board members are human beings, and it's those relationships combined with understanding roles that enables a human being to follow through in that kind of way. And then I do think also having a couple of champions, I mean, people are different, and there are some board members who are exceptional in different ways. Like we have on our board, I mean, Deborah has been, you know, exceptional in terms of leading in certain ways. I'm thinking of our vice chair, Irene, has been exceptional in different ways. And I think creating a leader-full kind of environment on the board where different board members can shine in their own way is really important.
Absolutely. And I think just from managing our board here, one of the things in terms of accountability to commitments, all of our board members are really busy professionals in the progressive space, and they're fitting in their board time at the edges of their day. So I send a lot of communication of like, here's where we are this week, and here's what I need from you, and make it like as few clicks and actions as I can for them as frequently as I can, just to make it easy, knowing that most of them are, you know, doing this at 9 o'clock at night after their day jobs and things like that. So I think I've had to carve out time and make it part of my operational process to really to do that as well, to keep things in front of them, especially they're better at the financial stuff than the non-financial stuff in terms of getting that processed. And then, Bud, you had also said regular in-services and trainings, I think is key. You know, obviously we focused a lot in our first training earlier this month on the onboarding training, but we also talked about at least an annual refresher training that you can make as that like final day of onboarding or things like that for existing board members. But also if there are even deeper dive, you know, biannual trainings you want to do with the board based on where you are as an organization or what you're trying to achieve in the next fiscal year.
I just
All
also,
right.
oh, can I just add one thing about that question about getting board members to be live up to their commitments, especially the non-financial ones. So, I mean, this is really simple, but thanking people is so important. And for executive directors, when you're so busy with so many different things to do, and it's, you know, sometimes it can fall through the cracks if one of the board members has you know, done something you know, that's especially helpful. And I, as board chair, make a practice of trying to thank board members for the specific things that they've done, not just saying to people, gee, you know, you're such a great board and you've, you know, raise so much money or whatever it is, that's kind of a general thing. But, you know, I stopped to think, and I think part of this is having been an executive director, I stopped to think about how much time somebody has put into whatever the task is. And I make sure that I have you know, just a personal communication with that person. And sometimes it lets the person know that Fletcher has told me how helpful something was that somebody did. I mean, sometimes it's something I notice, but that's really important, is to make sure that people know that their work is really appreciated and that they're making a significant contribution to the organization with this time that they're putting in.
No, that's great, Deborah. And I do think that we often forget to be super specific in our gratitude to board members, where we have an outgoing board chair that we are sort of doing some transition with. And just when I had to sit there and audit everything that he had done over the last 2 years before he has been stolen by the Biden administration, so he can't serve on our board anymore. But you know, the list from the small to the very big was amazing. So I think that's an excellent piece of advice. A little bit about empowerment in terms of making sure that the board feels confident in their role and sort of well prepared from a fundraising perspective. Anything else that you guys would add in outside of the discussion we've already had in terms of making the board feel really empowered to give and get around the mission?
You know, it builds on what Deborah just said, but I think celebration for the board as a group is good also, you know, to recognize, you know, hey, look what we've done. This is really great. And to emphasize not only, like, you know, total number of dollars raised, but also, like, anytime someone does something new for them, to praise that and to celebrate that, so that there is a culture of celebrating accomplishments, and also celebrating when people take new steps forward in their role as board members. You know, I think that people, generally speaking, know when they're trying out something new, and some affirmation around that is, I just think, really important, just as people who care about each other. And I also think that it helps people feel more confident if they're doing it on behalf of the organization, to see that it's being recognized.
Yeah, that's a great point. But did you want to weigh in on sort of where peer-to-peer plays a role in making board members feel empowered?
Yeah, I would just simply say that we don't have to think about the staff making the ask or the executive director making the ask to the board. It's best to engage them to do peer-to-peer fundraising, and then to engage them to be a part of the reach out to major donors, high net worth individuals, even occasionally, you know, going to a foundation. When I was working from nonprofit side, going to foundations instead of the foundation side, I almost always took a board member with me to make an in-person visit. Back in the days, we did that before the pandemic. To the people at the foundations, and even now in the Zoom era, I do the same thing. It's easier because people don't have to travel. You can say, "Can we do a Zoom call and be present?" And the statistics show that, frankly, a lot of foundations, although it's not a major source of giving, it's only 15% of the money that goes to nonprofits. A lot of foundations will entertain. They're more likely than not to entertain a conversation with you about what it is that you're doing in terms of a mission mashup. And having the ED and a board member there, great thing.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. And that having sort of that tag team I think is all that much more comfortable for the board members, especially making the ask. Had an interesting question of, and I don't know if the person who asked this is on the call still, but organization that doesn't do typical capital campaigns or grassroots fundraising. They are very foundation based, which is common in our sector. So they're looking for board help for some very specific fundraising needs around more internal capacity building, DEI work, professional development. When you want the board's help on not fundraising specifically for the outward mission, but more making the organization stronger, is there a way to approach that?
I would say 3 quick things. One is you can go to a foundation that you have a relationship with that gives you grants already and ask if they can give you a discretionary grant. They may not typically give capacity growing grants and so forth, but a lot of program officers within foundations, especially larger ones, have the capacity to give discretionary grants up to $25,000 without board approval and so forth. You can get one of those to do one of these types of projects. You can also do crowdsource funding online for a particularized project that's hard to get the funding for from other things. Those are pretty good to get something for that's like $10, $15, $20,000 range in terms of doing it. And the other is you can have conversations with foundations that say on the surface that they don't give capacity building support and whatnot about whether they would in a particularized instance. And you can also do, highly specific research on things like DEI, capacity building, etc., professional development, using the tools within Foundation Center online directory or Grant Station or one of these things to try to find some institution that's, if you're already getting a lot of money from foundations, some other foundation that might be willing to help support like kind sort of stuff. Unfortunately, the majority of foundations give to programmatic stuff and whatnot, not to those specific little things. So it's hard.
Yeah, and we know that capacity building is an increasing interest from institutional philanthropy, but it's still, less than 5% of the institutional sort of bucket of money. So I do think that doing your own independent revenue generation around these projects can help. I know that when we've gone out for funding for this kind of thing, like we actually had a solicitation made with a board member for someone specifically around doing some DEI education. So it was more of a major donor ask for us than an institutional ask, and made that case with a board member. So I think it's just more than anything, these have to be super specific of what does that capacity building do for your ability to increase your mission delivery. I find that doing the capacity building, because that's literally what we do, is we go to foundations and ask for capacity building grants because we fund fundraising. They could care less about the ROI on our fundraising projects, but they want to know, what does that capacity do for the group that we're working with? Does it help them add to their programs? Does it put more organizers on the street? Like, what does it do? So I think making that tie and then finding the right donor and the right board pairing to ask for it makes a lot of sense. All right, 2 more questions, and any that anybody wants to add into the chat or speak up with. Any recommendations on how to build ownership, responsibility, and excitement? We've covered a lot of that in terms of how to do this with board fundraising. Do you guys have a separate fundraising committee within the board? Is the board big enough for that, or is it an all-in? How do you handle that at Green Faith?
We have a development committee that meets quarterly to prepare a report on our development activities for the board meeting. But in a lot of ways, also, I would say, it's interesting in our case at this point. The board as a whole, I think, in a lot of ways, does more of the actual work than the development committee. The development committee and I connect quarterly, and I come in with, here's what we've done, here are the priorities for the coming quarter, and we talk some about those. So there's a strategic role that the committee plays in terms of the implementation, with Deborah being an enthusiastic supporter of the board's fundraising role. And I think an awful lot happens broadly at the board meetings as opposed to in a subgroup.
Yep, I think that makes sense. last question we've got is around planned giving, and I'm fascinated by this. We have an entire cohort of groups that have been doing revenue generation experimentation with planned giving. What are the best ways to engage board members around a planned giving initiative? That's very different than, obviously asking them to get, but planned giving can be a whole different ballgame. But I know you put some things in the chat around this, but would love to throw this out for you guys to discuss.
This is something that, to be honest, I was a parish priest for 10 years, and I did more on this when I was a parish priest than I have at Green Faith, and it's something that Bud has been encouraging us to look at more because of its potential. I mean, I think that my experience has taught me that some good ways to do it are to articulate the case and the reason that it's such a smart idea to do this, as Bud has been doing with me, not just, to get my head out of my experience from 20 years ago and into the present about the potential. And when board members, I think, see the potential, I think that generates excitement. And then I think also my instinct is that as Green Faith moves into doing some more planned giving stuff, I have ideas about 4 or 5 people, 3 or 4 people who I would approach to make a planned giving commitment, a planned gift to Green Faith. I have included Green Faith in my will, but I'm hoping that I'll be around for quite a while longer. So, but I think, being able to say, I've done this, and I know that Green Faith has meant a lot to you, and would you join me, or would you do this? So, I think it's a combination of painting the big picture and then trying to find some early leaders who would make commitments. Because nothing succeeds like success. If you get a sense of, oh, wow, we can actually do this, I think that increases the likelihood that others will participate and will start to think seriously about who they might reach out to. I mean, my sense is that planned gifts are going to come largely from people who have the closest relationship with the organization. And so it's not a coincidence that the people that I think of who I would go to for planned gifts for Green Faith are sort of former board members, one of the original founders of the organization, that sort of thing.
Yeah,
We're,
I think that. Go ahead, Deborah.
Yeah, I was going to say that Bud mentioned before that we are kind of in the process of establishing some other auxiliary entities to help the organization and to support the board of directors. And one of the ones that we're considering is a group of people who would really be helping us with fundraising, taking specific roles in fundraising. And I could see that as being a starting point for the people, some of the people that we might engage in that process. And it might be a good idea to engage someone who is, would potentially do that, or even would be willing to make that commitment as part of establishing that group, so that it, kind of gives it a sense of gravitas and, long-term commitment. So that's
absolutely great. All right. Those are all of the questions that were. Oh, go ahead, Bud.
No, I was just sharing. I think the one thing is to have a gift receipt policy. Unfortunately, a lot of nonprofits have not written out what their sort of processes are for receiving gifts of a variety of sorts, of which planned giving can be part of it. And there are some special sort of considerations based on what state you live in and where the money come from and that sort of thing that you have to There's a lot of stuff that's available for free online, but ultimately, so you should consult with a lawyer, hopefully a pro bono one, who can help you to make certain that your way of handling stuff. And there's multiple ways. Again, all of the types of things, there's scalable. There's simple ways to do it. There's more sophisticated ways in which to get involved in plan giving. There's turnkey services that are available now where you pay a couple $1,000s a year, and there's an entity that will help develop a plan giving module and way of being that you can inject into your website, and they help handle all the legal aspects on the backside, which is a great thing.
Yeah, and the one thing about planned giving, you know, Bud mentioned the sort of the tech and the services like a Stelter or things like that that you can buy into. Planned giving laws and rules change each year. So whether it's you're bringing your board in to support the effort, things like that, it's something to make sure that you put enough investment in, that you support your donors with the right tools. So whether that's freewill.com or a Stelter or any of those things, you know, however you're going to present that planned giving information, there is more legality in it than most other types of fundraising. So make sure that you're prepared for that. And if anybody has specific questions, of course, reach out. As always, we're happy to go deeper there. Are there any other questions that the crowd has before we let our panelists go? Look into the chat, and I cannot see raised hands. So Jasmine, I'm looking to you to monitor video, my friend. Anything else? All right, hearing nothing. Thank you as always for making time on your Friday, and Fletcher, Deborah, and Bud, thank you so much for taking the time. It has been an honor to work with Green Faith as through the Resilience Initiative, and really appreciate you guys giving back to this larger community with this discussion. And if anybody has any questions for our panelists, please feel free to email them to Jazz or I, and we can certainly get them to our panelists if you want their perspective. But you know, the dates for future fundraising Fridays are in your e-newses from your respective granting organizations. You'll be getting the Survey Monkey as always, so please let us know how we did. If you like this panel format, if you want something different, just let us know. We are always ready to custom craft whatever is most useful for this audience. So thank you guys, and have a wonderful, wonderful weekend.
Thanks for the chance to be with you